Picture this. It's still dark outside, somewhere along Ireland's west coast, and the wind has been leaning on the cottage walls all night. Rain ticks against the small window. Inside, the fire has often been banked carefully overnight, not for comfort, but because relighting it from scratch could cost more turf and trouble than anyone could spare. The room is cold enough that breath shows in the air. And breakfast isn't really a question of what anyone wants to eat. It's a question of what's actually left in the house. For generations, Irish grandmothers built their whole understanding of cooking around that one quiet calculation. They fed families through bad harvests, emigration, and lean years. Most of what they made never ended up in a cookbook, yet every dish on this list was built around the same idea. Make it stretch, make it last, and waste nothing. Boxty. Start with potatoes because in rural Ireland you almost always did. Some grated raw, some boiled and mashed, mixed together with a little flour and fried on a hot griddle until the outside went dark and crisp. Boxty was especially common in the border counties. Leitrim, Cavan, Fermanagh, the kind of land that grew potatoes well and not much else. There's an old rhyme that followed it around. Boxty on the griddle, on the pan. If you can't make boxty, you'll never get a man. It wasn't a delicacy, it was just what was in the house, turned into breakfast before a day in wet fields. Stirabout. Long before anyone in Ireland had heard of a cereal box, breakfast for most children was stirabout. Oatmeal stirred slowly into boiling water until it thickened. Nothing added unless someone could spare a little milk or salt. It had a darker side too. During and after the famine, stirabout made from oatmeal or Indian meal became a common ration in workhouses and relief schemes. For an older generation, the dish carried two memories at once: a warm, ordinary breakfast and a reminder of how thin things had gotten not so long before. Potato farls. Nothing from last night's dinner went to waste if it could be helped. Cold mashed potatoes left in the pot were worked into a dough with a bit of flour, flattened, cut into triangles, and browned on the griddle the next morning. In the north especially, this sat alongside soda bread as part of what people still call the Ulster fry, though in poorer households, the farl often was the meal, not a side to one. Bread and dripping. Some mornings, lighting the fire again just wasn't worth the fuel. A thick slice of bread, spread with dripping, the fat saved and strained from whatever meat had been cooked days before, was breakfast, full stop. Families saved and reused dripping whenever there was meat to render. It sounds plain by today's standards, but dripping was dense in calories, and for people doing hard physical work from dawn to dark, that mattered more than flavor. Cottle. Cottle belongs to Dublin specifically, born in the tenements rather than on a farm. The classic version uses sliced sausages and rashers of bacon, layered with potatoes and onions, and simmered low for hours, often on a Sunday, using whatever was left from Saturday's shopping. James Joyce was said to be fond of it, and Dubliners still defend it fiercely against outsiders who wrinkle their nose at its pale look. Yellowman and tea. Yellowman wasn't really an everyday survival food. It's a hard, honeycomb-textured toffee tied to County Antrim and the Auld Lammas Fair in Ballycastle, one of Ireland's oldest fairs. Traveling sellers, sometimes called candymen, sold it from stalls alongside dulse, the dried seaweed snack. For households where sweets were rare, a piece of Yellowman with tea was a genuine treat, tied to a single day out rather than the daily grind. Dulse. Along the northern and western coasts, dulse, a red seaweed gathered from rocks and dried in the wind, was sold at markets and fairs, especially alongside Yellowman at the Auld Lammas Fair. People ate it as it was, salty and chewy, or added it to broths and stews. For people living close to the sea, it was simply another way of turning the landscape into supper. Champ. Mashed potato mixed with chopped scallions, butter, and a splash of milk. Simple, but champ carries real folklore, particularly in Ulster. On Garland Sunday and at Halloween, families sometimes hid a ring or a small coin inside the bowl, the chance of finding it turning an ordinary meal into a small occasion. Most nights it was just dinner, a hollow pressed into the middle, filled with melted butter, each forkful dipped in before it was eaten. Colcannon. Potatoes appeared so often on Irish tables that people found countless ways to stretch them. Colcannon was one of the best known. Mashed potatoes mixed with cabbage or kale, enriched with whatever butter or milk could be spared. Like champ, it carried its own Halloween customs, with small coins, rings, or buttons, sometimes hidden inside, each said to predict something about the finder's future. Most evenings, though, it was simply about filling stomachs with whatever could still be found in the garden, once more, delicate crops had gone. Nettle soup. Spring brought its own kind of hunger in rural Ireland, sometimes called the hungry gap, the old stores running low before the new crops came in. Nettles, gathered by hand from the hedgerows, boiled down into a green, earthy soup. There was also an old folk belief that eating nettles 3 times in May would keep a person healthy for the rest of the year. It was simply what the land offered when the garden and the larder couldn't. Crubines. Crubines are pig's trotters, scraped clean and boiled for hours until the meat came away easily. They're particularly associated with Cork and with pub culture more broadly. For a long time, a plate of crubines was the classic Friday or Saturday night snack to go with a pint, sold by women known locally as crubine women. Nothing about the dish was elegant, but when an animal was slaughtered, every part of it had to earn its keep. Blah with dripping. The blah isn't a generic Irish bread roll, it's a Waterford thing specifically, a soft floury bap baked in that city for centuries, said to have arrived with Huguenot settlers. Generations of dock workers and bakery hands started their mornings with one. Split open, spread with dripping, and a little salt. Cheap, filling, and easy to carry in a coat pocket, it was simple food built for long days. Sheep's head broth. A sheep's head, simmered for hours until the bones gave up everything they had, was about as close to nothing wasted cooking as Ireland produced. Butchers often sold them cheaply because most customers wouldn't touch them. Families who could least afford to be picky turned them into a broth that fed everyone in the house. It's not a dish many would choose to cook today, but it tells you plainly what hunger does to a person's idea of waste. Carrageen moss, pudding. Along the west coast, West Cork, Connemara, the Aran Islands, people gathered carrageen moss, a type of seaweed, from rocks exposed at low tide, often around Holy Thursday, when tradition held the harvest was best. Dried, then boiled slowly with milk, it set into a soft, faintly briny pudding, also valued as a remedy for chest colds and coughs. That knowledge, which rocks, which tide, which week, belonged to people who'd spent a lifetime reading the coast and mostly died with them. Tripe and onions. Tripe, the lining of a cow's stomach, cleaned and boiled until tender, divided households then just as it would now. In Cork, it was traditionally served alongside drisheen, a type of blood pudding sold together at the city's Old English market, a pairing locals still defend. Elsewhere, it appeared simply with onions and a plain white sauce. It survived because it was cheap and available, and in hard years, that mattered more than anyone's personal taste. None of these meals were written down with any thought of being remembered. Nobody serving stirabout to a house full of children or boiling a sheep's head because the butcher couldn't sell it to anyone else thought they were preserving anything. They were just getting through the week. Looking back now, the Dublin coddle pot, the Waterford blah, the carrageen gathered at low tide, you see the shape of a whole way of life that's mostly gone. Cold kitchens, long walks in the rain, the habit of wasting nothing. What could be grown, gathered, and stretched far enough to feed everyone until tomorrow. That's what tied Irish kitchens together. Whether they stood on a windswept farm, a narrow city street, or a rocky stretch of coast. Not abundance, not variety, just the determination to make do.